Well, hello there. It's great to see you all again. Welcome to another episode, another edition of the Ezra File. And if you're watching on Twitter, this is the first ever live broadcast of the Ezra File on Twitter. So well done for joining us on that one. So why are we here? What's this particular episode about? And why are we broadcasting on Twitter as well? Well, we thought we might do it because it's a fun thing to do. But this episode relate to some of the recent comments by the Bishop of Oxford, comments which were widely reported in the media, which were followed up by some more comments from two or three other bishops as well, to the effect that the Church of England really does need to change its teaching on human sexuality and its understanding of marriage. It should move towards a position, and indeed embrace the position, of homosexual marriage, of gay marriage. As I said, this has been widely reported in the in the press, so it's something that you may well have heard in the last few weeks. Now, of course, we live in a free society. We live in a society that values personal liberty and personal freedom, and those things are great things. But the teaching of the church, well, that's a different matter altogether. What's the job of a bishop? Well, the job of a bishop, very simply, is to uphold, expound, and defend the Christian faith. And in the Church of England, a bishop upholds, expounds, and defends the Christian faith as the Church of England has received it. And the Christian faith, the historic Christian faith, rooted in the Scriptures, has with it a sexual ethic. The Christian sexual ethic is that sex is to be between one man and one woman within the confines of lifelong marriage. That is what the Bible teaches. That's what 2,000 years of Christian tradition, up until relatively very recently, has universally affirmed. And that is what the Church of England has received in its foundation documents. And the Bishop of Oxford, joined by one or two others, says that teaching must change to incorporate and reflect the realities of changes in secular society. That, of course, that, of course, has happened in secular society. The Bishop of Oxford has said whatever it is he wants to say, but so far I haven't heard any response, any contrary response from any other bishops. So in the absence of that, I would like just to say my little piece as some guy in a parish in South Yorkshire. And I would like to say that if the Church of England does decide to go down that route, I believe that would be a very, very serious mistake for it to do. I believe that the Christian sexual ethic does belong to the very heart of the Christian faith. I think if you look at the Bible's teaching on human sexuality and marriage, it is a very deep and profound piece of the Christian faith. If you look at the Bible, if you look at where the teaching on sex and marriage occurs, it occurs in some of the deepest levels of what the Bible has to say to us. The kind of first level that you can understand the Bible's teaching on human sexuality, the first level is what you might call the level of law, the rules, the laws, the commandments that the Bible contains. And you could think specifically there of certain verses in the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament. You must not lie with a woman as you lie with a man. But it actually goes much deeper than that. The Bible doesn't just deal with this whole area of human sexuality at the level of law. It goes much deeper than that. It deals with it also at the level of meaning and purpose. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, as the Bible story begins. The Bible goes on to tell us that God created human beings in his own image. male and female, he created them. Man and woman were created for one another to come together in marriage as a basis for the subsequent generation to be raised and to be nurtured. Christianity, therefore, has a high view of the human body. It sees in the embedded structures of the human body a clear divine purpose and design, that the male body was made for the female body for the purposes of reproduction. And so the Bible deals with this whole subject at the level of how, as human beings, we can find meaning and purpose for ourselves. We can find it in a man and a woman coming together within marriage to lay the groundwork for the next generation. But the Bible goes even deeper than that, actually. It deals with it at the level of law, it deals with it at the level of meaning and purpose, but it also deals with it at the level of the Bible's iconography. The Bible's iconography is based on a man and a woman coming together in marriage. If you look in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, the church of God is pictured as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. The husband in this case is Jesus Christ himself. So the Bible understands the relationship between Jesus Christ and his people, the church, in terms of the marriage of a man and a woman. So deeply embedded is this understanding of human sexuality. It influences the whole iconography, the whole symbolism that the Bible uses to talk about the relationship between God, between Christ and his people. Now, some people will say, well, actually, wait a minute, what about Jesus? What actually did Jesus say? And some people will say, well, he never actually said anything about homosexuality. Well, that is a kind of a half-truth that ends up being completely wrong. Jesus, it is true, he didn't deal with it directly. If you think about Jesus, Jesus was in human terms a first century Palestinian Jew. Jesus, of course, was born in Bethlehem, and he never went much beyond a couple of 100 miles from the place that he was born, or a couple 100 miles from Nazareth, which is where he was brought up. Jesus lived in the midst of a society that carried within it a powerful prohibition on homosexual acts. First century Palestinian Judaism had a very strong prohibition against homosexual acts. And Jesus, well, he never confronts that. He never says, he confronts the society of his day in other ways, but in this way, not really. Jesus never sees the need to confront that prohibition on homosexual acts. And that's the bit that's half right, is that he never confronted it. But that makes it completely wrong because he had no reason to confront it. And also, actually, if you look at Jesus' teaching on marriage, something else appears. Jesus does teach on the subject of marriage. A couple of places in the Gospels, Jesus touches on this area. And whenever Jesus teaches on the subject of marriage, he goes back to those foundational texts in the book of Genesis, that a man shall leave his mother and his father and be united with his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. He takes his understanding of marriage from the biblical story of Adam and Eve. In other words, he understands marriage, he understands sexual relations between a man and a woman. And when he talks about the subject of divorce, Jesus says that divorce is only really permissible, it's only really allowable in the case of, and the Greek word that he uses is porneia. Porneia is, of course, where we get our English word from, which means pornography. But porneia was, it's usually translated in English versions as some kind of sexual immorality. You shouldn't divorce except on the grounds of sexual immorality. And porneia was a general word. It had a wide meaning. It covered what you might call heterosexual practices outside marriage, living together, sleeping together, whatever. But it also covered homosexual acts as well. So Jesus, perhaps he didn't say anything directly, but certainly indirectly, is very clear where Jesus stood in the whole area of marriage and sexuality. And it's also interesting, actually, to compare Jesus with St. Paul. And there's the four Gospels, but about half the New Testament was written by St. Paul. If you compare St. Paul and Jesus in this respect, it's actually quite interesting, I think. St. Paul was a Jew, but St. Paul wasn't born in Israel. He came from Tarsus, which was much further north. And Paul, as you read the New Testament, Paul was a traveller. He was widely travelled around the eastern part of the Roman Empire, what we would call Turkey today, and then on into Italy and Greece. He was a widely travelled individual. He also was also clearly educated in some of the Greek classical texts. So Paul, from his own experience, would have encountered homosexuality in the ancient world. And of course, in Paul's letters, you find that subject addressed, as it were, head on. The most famous part of Paul's letters, of course, is Romans chapter 1, where it deals with the subject of homosexuality. There are other parts that do, but that's the one that seems to be that most people, if you look into the subject, will be familiar with. And Paul, like Paul, reflects Jesus' teaching, except he states it much more clearly. I'd like to show you a book here. It's the very short introduction series, which you might have seen in bookshops. This is the very short introduction of Paul by a guy called E.P. Sanders. E.P. Sanders was is a stratospherically important figure in the study of St. Paul in the 20th century. He launched what came to be known as the New Perspective on Paul, or rather, as we should say today, maybe the not so new perspective on Paul, given that it was launched in 1977 when I was a mere callow youth. But this is what E.P. Sanders says about Paul's understanding of homosexuality. He says this: homosexual activity. Paul was against homosexuality, both active and inactive, both male and female. This marks him as Jewish. So he reflected the very strong prohibition that first century Judaism had against homosexual acts. And he was able to state that very clearly, because that was a pressing issue for him as he travelled through the Greco-Roman world, where, of course, homosexuality was a feature of that kind of society. And the Church of England has taken that biblical understanding of human sexuality and marriage, and it has incorporated it into its own foundational documents. And so therefore it is no light matter when a figure such as the Bishop of Oxford and those who have stood up and supported him, it's no light matter what they've said and what they're advocating. They're advocating setting aside the biblical text. They're advocating setting aside what St. Paul and Jesus say, and instead conforming ourselves to the secular world. But what will happen if we do? Say the Church of England goes down that path. What will happen if that happens? One of the things that, when it's frequently said that the church should change its teaching in this area, one of the things that's usually said is that we will look more relevant, we will reach more people, we will reverse the church's decline, because everybody will see how relevant we've become to society. We've moved with the times, and they'll all come to church and join us. Well, I'd like to show you some recent figures, or some recent diagrams rather, about a guy, John Haywood, who's a bit of a statistician, and he's crunched some numbers. He's taken membership statistics from the last 20 years of the major denominations, church denominations in this country, and he's from each denomination, from the statistics for each denomination, he's calculated what he calls his R number. Now, you'll all be familiar with R numbers because remember COVID. We had R numbers with COVID, didn't we? Replication number, if the disease was spreading, then the R number was greater than 1. If the disease was contracting, then the R number was less than 1. And he does a similar thing for church denominations in this country. And I'll show you the numbers that he's crunched. There you go. I'll show them to Facebook first. As you can see there, if you look at the line here, the x-axis here, anything above the line is an R number greater than 1. So that means that that particular church grouping is growing. Anything below the x-axis is an R number of less than 1. In other words, that church grouping is declining. And the red and blue, the red refers to denominations and church groupings that were established after 1900 and denominations that were established before 1900. And as you can see, all of the major historical denominations are in decline. Methodists, Roman Catholics, Church of Wales, and the Church of England here is in decline. The newer churches, the Elim Pentecostals, the Free Evangelical Church, the Redeemed Church of God, the Vineyard grouping, the new churches, well, they're growing. They're obviously flourishing, even in the midst of a general decline. So I'll just show that to Twitter as well, just so they can see that. Now, what John Haywood did next was he mapped onto this collection of church groupings, he mapped support for gay marriage. So he looked at each church denomination and said, have they accepted gay marriage? Have they accepted same-sex marriage? Or are they on the verge of accepting it? Or have they said, no, we're not going down that pathway? And so he maps gay marriage onto that, and he produces this. So these are the denominations that are increasing in number, and he's coded them red. And red means they are opposed to same-sex marriage. So there you go. All of the denominations that are growing maintain the traditional Christian understanding of sex and marriage. There are one or two who are in decline, but if you look at the ones that are coded yellow means they accept same-sex marriage. So in other words, that graph is telling you that no growing church endorses same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage is negatively associated with growth. In other words, same-sex marriage acceptance is the sign of a dying church. This bit over here tells you that maintaining the traditional biblical teaching on sex and marriage, it won't guarantee you growth, but you won't get growth without it. So if the Church of England were to embrace same-sex marriage, and there's the Church of England there, would it grow or would it decline? Well, the evidence would seem to suggest that it would further continue its decline and maybe even accelerate its decline. Acceptance of same-sex marriage, the revision of the church's teaching on sex and marriage will not bring growth. It will just bring further and deeper decline. And you can see a similar thing where it's happened overseas, parts of the Anglican Church which have embraced, like in America and Canada. It just produces more and more decline. If the Church of England does go on to embrace same-sex marriage, it will repeat one of the biggest mistakes that it has ever made in its history. And what I mean by that is this. Why has Britain become effectively a post-Christian society? Why has Christianity become weaker in this country? Well, that's been a century-long decline, a century more long decline. But one of the principal catalysts for that, especially if you read a guy like Peter Hitchens, he's very big on this one. But one of the principal catalysts for the decline of Christianity in this country was World War I. World War I The British establishment. The British establishment was gung-ho, gung-ho to fight Germany. And there's all those posters of "Your country needs you." And the Church of England, because it's the established church, got caught up with the general tenor of the establishment. And instead of stepping back and offering a critique of the establishment in its desire to go and fight Germany, it went along with it. And of course, in going along with it, it produced the Somme, it produced trench warfare, and the Church of England became complicit in a huge disillusionment of people in the country with the traditional establishment. Had it have stood back and offered a critique, well, maybe things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. Maybe the decline wouldn't have happened in the way that it has happened. But it's on the verge of doing the same thing here over same-sex marriage. It's the establishment, the British establishment, has decided that same-sex marriage must be part of the law of this country. The Church of England has a choice. Does it go with the establishment, or does it stand back and offer a critique? It's on the verge of making the same mistake that it made back in World War I. Instead of just going along with the establishment simply because it is the established church, the Church of England, I would say, if it is to survive, if it is to grow, if it is to flourish, must take a step back. It must offer a critique. It must say to society, you have chosen this path, but this is a path that we cannot walk with you. We will hold out to you our teaching based on the Bible, founded on Jesus Christ and St. Paul and the New Testament itself. Here is another way. If it offers that alternative, who knows? It may start to grow. So I don't know what's going to happen. I know what the Bishop of Oxford and others have said. And I'm just a guy in a parish in South Yorkshire. But if the Church of England is to survive, it must take a step back. It mustn't go with the rest of society just because society is going that way. Be seeing you.